Last time, we're going to, as we talked about persecution being a part of our lives, we read the first three verses. Today, let's read verses 1 through 6 in chapter 4 in Nehemiah. It says, "But it so happened when Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, that he was furious and very indignant and mocked the Jews. And he spoke before his brethren and the army of Samaria and said, 'What are these feeble Jews doing? Will they fortify themselves? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they complete it in a day? Will they revive the stones from the heaps of rubbish, stones that are burned?' Now Tobiah the Ammonite was beside him, and he said, 'Whatever they build, if even a fox goes up on it, it will break down their stone wall. Hear, O God, for we are despised. Turn their reproach on their own heads and give them as plunder to a land of captivity. Do not cover their iniquity, and do not let their sin be blotted out from before you, for they have provoked you to anger before the builders.' So we built the wall, and the entire wall was joined together up to half its height, for the people had a mind to work." Now, when we look here, we see two different perspectives here. First, you see what the enemies of the Jews are doing. Then you hear a prayer from Nehemiah. Last time we talked about, let's see. Okay. It's not working. Is it my battery? Okay. No. Okay, here we go. Oh, this is it. So we talked about what bullies do. We said the first thing they do is ridicule or mock. This is the first type of persecution that they go through with the Jews at this point. So they begin to use mockery, ridicule. As soon as the construction began, news of the rebuilding quickly reached Sanballat. And Sanballat was the Samaritan governor. Apparently, he called a meeting of his associates who opposed the Jews. We shared that he bitterly opposed the appointment of Nehemiah being governor there in Jerusalem. The rebuilding project, it was going to strengthen the Jews, which in turn would cause Sanballat to lose some power, some influence in the local area. And hearing of the project made him very angry. So much that he burned with rage. Have you ever seen people that just burned with rage? It's almost a scary thought. To see somebody in a rage, the best thing to do is just leave them alone. Walk away, go in a different direction, because if you become confrontational with them, at that point, they're just out of themselves. They're no longer themselves. And what they do can be drastic. We were, I might have shared this some time ago. When doing line work, I was running a crew. We were in the Clyburn Pines area. And while we were in there, we had to change out a pole. So when we set up the trucks and we looked around, and I noticed, man, we can get off the road. You know, Clyburn Pines can be busy, and there's no real shoulder. We could get off the road. But we had to be in the front yard of this homeowner. But we were right there at the ditch, so it wasn't going to be a big deal. What became a big deal was that when I told one of the guys that was working with me to go tell the homeowner we're going to have their lights out in a little while, but we'll let them know exactly when. We were giving them a heads up so that when we come back, we would have them out for probably 30 minutes. Instead of walking to the homeowner's home, which we were in the front yard, he drove across the yard with the pickup truck. Made no ruts, but you could see where the tires had laid the grass down. Well, the homeowner's wife, or I don't know if it's her home or her husband's home, but she come out, and she come out in a rage. Now, I'm running the crew, and she is going off. Her husband sees what's going on. He comes out, and about that time, one of the lead guys on the crew looked at me and said, "We might need to leave." I'm supposing that the folks in the from the office at Lumbee River had let them know we were going to do this work, which they were supposed to. Well, by the time the husband gets out there, I tell him, "Look, we're packing up, we're leaving. She don't want us here. It looks like you don't want us here. We're leaving. I'll get with them in the office, and they'll get things straight." When we got to the next job site, the guy that had walked up to me and said, "We might need to leave," he said, "Preacher, she was in such a rage, it would have been bad if we would have continued to work." We had unloaded the pole, had the pole framed up, had to load the pole back up, and get out of the yard as quick as possible. When people are in a rage, it can become a dangerous thing. You don't know what's going to happen. Somebody's in a rage at their home, oh, they've got the advantage, because they can walk in their home, get a weapon, come out, and just ease their mind in that moment. They'll regret it later, but when you're in a rage, you do things that are out of character, or maybe it reveals your character. But when people are in a rage, the best thing to do is to get out of their way. Well, Sanballat's here in a rage. He is upset that there's somebody else here that's going to take some of his influence away. And so he brings these men, some other opponents of the Jews, together. And he's getting his army mobilized. And he's wanting these others to, let's surround this wall that's being built. Let's intimidate them. If we begin to ridicule them, maybe it'll stop them in their tracks. So after the opposition had gathered, he publicly ridiculed the Jews, the officials, and the army. In sarcasm, with sarcastic-filled questions, he begins to launch insults towards Nehemiah and the Jews. So first, what we find is they ridiculed them by calling them feeble Jews. So now he's attacking the Jews personally. He's telling them that they're weak, they're frail, they're miserable, they're powerless. They have no ability to defend themselves. Now, at this time, we who are outside looking in, the Jews would look like they're over their head with things. Looks like they're bitten off more than they could chew. Here, they're poverty-stricken. They had no wealth whatsoever. They didn't have a military to defend themselves. And here we could see why people would actually think they were vulnerable. They were feeble. They were people who could easily be taken captive. They hadn't been back long enough, or they hadn't been strong enough as they've been back to really establish themselves, or Nehemiah wouldn't have had to come. So here we find that Sanballat encourages his followers just to mock and to ridicule the Jewish workers. This was, as he was wanting to ridicule them, he wanted them to see just how enormous this task is. It was just he wanted them to hear. Because the more we get things in our head, the more we hear, the more we start to believe. If anybody watches Yahoo News and believes or reads Yahoo News and believes much of what you say or what they print, you know that, people can be brainwashed easily. So here, Sanballat, he's wanting them to hear all of this ridicule. There was too much destruction. There was too much debris around that needed to be cleaned up so that they could actually do the work. It was going to take them too long. There must have been thousands of tons of stones on the ground. Now keep in mind, the whole city had been laid waste. The stone wall that was there before had been laid to waste. The towers, the temple, everything had been laid to waste. And here they are wanting to build a wall in the same place where the wall was at. So you're having to step over and work over all of this debris. Anybody been on 5th Street today? West 5th Street? Well, you know, you can't walk in the middle of Burger King because it's just debris all over the place. It's just been laid to waste. Burger King's been destroyed. I can't imagine trying to find something that's useful in all of that when I saw it this morning. So that all of that debris is going to get hauled off, and then they're going to come in and build a brand new one up. But this stuff wasn't being hauled off. It was there in the way. So you can imagine, yeah, this is going to be easy. Let's just talk to them about what's going on. Let's let them know that they're foolish to think that they can build in the midst of this stuff. That's just how feeble their minds are. That these people, they're not even being objective. They're not looking around and seeing what's real out there. That's what's going in the minds of Sanballat and the other opponents of the Jews. So in the minds of the enemies, the Jews were just fools, and they deserved to be mocked for undertaking such a task that they felt that they couldn't accomplish anyway. Is this about as far as we got last time? Okay. So what we want to notice is, second, they didn't just ridicule their fact that they were feeble. If we look there in verse 2, he says, what are these feeble Jews doing? Then he asked the question, will they fortify themselves? In other words, do they think they can finally start protecting themselves? So they began to ridicule their hope. The hope of them being able to build something that would protect them. He was mocking as if they sought to strengthen themselves by hiding behind a restored wall. It's one thing to hide behind a wall that's been newly put up. But you're going to try to put up a wall in the midst of all of this stuff. Do you really think it's going to be strong enough that you can hide behind it? As a matter of fact, Sanballat's probably thinking, with these 4 armies, do you think whatever you build is going to be strong enough to keep us out? That's what they're ridiculing them about. In the minds of Sanballat and his crew, the walls of Jerusalem had been so ruined that that the stones used wouldn't be worth using. Actually, they wouldn't be able to withstand any significant force. So how could a feeble people build a wall strong enough to protect themselves from the attack of these armies? It would be just one army. As a matter of fact, it would be 4 different peoples, and they would come from all sides. So here, the Jews' hope for protection in the minds of their enemies was foolish, and they deserved to be mocked because they wanted to protect themselves. How do you feel when you feel like you're about to do something that you know it is the right thing to do, and then someone comes by just to mock you, to laugh at you, to tell you you're foolish, to tell you that this is a waste of time? You know, if it's at your home, you're doing something and they come up and they make, you know, people, especially in the Southeast, we are somewhat sarcastic people in general. And you know how we approach people. We'll come up to you, man, what are you doing? And you know that ain't going to work. If you're serious about what you're doing, it'll rub you the wrong way, won't it? And you have to catch yourself before you've said something that you know, you responded in a way you might have to apologize for it. And you know, especially if it's somebody that's always negative anyway, because you don't hear any joking or picking about it. You hear it yourself being mocked rather than just being chided with. And no support. Yeah, you feel like you got no support. Listen, the worst thing a wife could ever do is publicly mock her husband. That is the very worst thing a wife could ever do. I tell you why. A man don't have to hear "I love you," but he needs to know he's respected. If he feels disrespected, he'll grow cold and grow cold in a hurry. Now I'm hearing some mm-hms, which means I'm telling you the truth. and even doing it privately, after a while, a man will get quiet. A man will get quiet, and he'll feel like, man, in his mind, he's saying, everything I do, everything I say is wrong. I'm just going to quit. I'm just going to quit. Instead, the wife has to find a way to be the biggest cheerleader the man's ever had. Now, this is going to be contingent, men, on us loving our wives the way Christ loved the church. When the church spat on him, when they poured the hair out of his face, when they beat him, when they crowned him with thorns and nailed him to an old rugged cross, he loved them enough not to want any of that brought to their charge. I think sometimes we hear that we love our wives as Christ loved the church, meaning we're willing to die. And most husbands are willing to die for their wives. But there's so much more to that. He suffered by the religious people. He suffered because of our sins. He went through the ringer and more. And when our wives are putting us through the ringer, we're to still love them. It's not always easy. I don't think there was anything easy about the cross. But he had his mind set on the Father. And I do believe when people get saved and come to the saving knowledge of Jesus Christ, that's what stays in front of them. And that's why we love him. Because of what he went through for us. And if that's why we love him, then that's why we would want to obey him and follow him. And I'm convinced that when we love our wives that way, they'll want to honor us. They'll want to be our biggest cheerleaders. They'll want to be there for us to encourage us when we're down and when we're low. I'm just convinced of that. Maybe I'm naive. There are exceptions to every rule. I get that. Some people, it don't matter how good you are to them. They're never gonna reciprocate that. No one knows that better than Jesus. Because there's people dying and going to hell every day when he died so that they could have life. So here, I don't know how I brought that out, but here we know that the Jews, it was very easy for them to feel like they had no hope their enemies was telling them, your hope for protection is feeble. Your hope for protection is useless. Your hope for protection is no good right now because we can come at any time. Basically is what they're saying to them. But Sanballat didn't just ridicule their hope. He didn't just ridicule them as being feeble. He also ridiculed their religion. Look there, he says, will they offer sacrifices? He's asked if they were going to offer sacrifice to seek their God's help in rebuilding the walls. What he didn't know, they were there because of the Lord. They weren't having to seek the Lord's help. It was because of the Lord's help that Nehemiah got wind that they were in a bad way in Jerusalem. It was because of the Lord's help that Nehemiah was able to orchestrate a plan. It was because of the Lord's help that Nehemiah knew when and how to approach King Artaxerxes. It was because of the Lord's help that Nehemiah got from Persia to Jerusalem. It was because of the Lord's help that Nehemiah was able to share this plan and convince the people to do their part in building this. The Lord had been doing this all along. It wasn't that they needed the Lord's help. The Lord was allowing them to help him. And that's what the enemy didn't recognize. And here he's making fun of them. He's ridiculing them, asking if they were going to seek their God's help. What he was suggesting is that it was going to take more than their God to rebuild such a devastated city, to rebuild a devastated wall. Exactly. You've already lost. What was that they said about the Titanic? Not even God could sink this ship. And its first voyage out, it sunk. We have to be awfully careful when we mock God. When we mock God, God will show us who he is and what he's able to do. No matter how much they prayed and sacrificed, he was saying their God was not powerful enough to use these feeble people to complete this impossible task. Now, this is what the enemy is saying to the Jews. Let me ask us, does the enemy say that to us? You ever hear the enemy say that no matter what you do, no matter how much you pray, no matter how you seek the face of God, you're not going to be able to do this? Yeah. Yeah. How many times hasn't God wanted you to witness to somebody, I can't do that? Or something, the enemy's telling you, you can't talk to them. Man, do you know how rough they are? And they don't want to hear it. They're busy. They're on the phone. Oh, no, you can't witness to them. They've got they're filling up their vehicle. They're getting in the vehicle and they're going out of town. You'll never see them again. Oh, y'all can't do that at that church. Turn this building around. Y'all, man, how are you going to turn this building around? Build a family life center and pay it off in 4 years, 5 years, 6 years? How are you going to do that? We can't. But God can do it if we're willing to allow him to use us as a vessel. You know what? I love Brother Joe Brooks. I love Brother Joe. He was good to me. He was very encouraging. My first couple years here, it weren't many days if I was here, he didn't stop by, just to say something encouraging. And Brother Joe had this influence in this church that I recognized really quick. I'm the pastor, but I'm not the most influential person in this church because I didn't know people. People didn't know me. People had to get to know me, and I had to get to know people. But they knew him. He was the most influential person in the church at that time. Now, I'm still not the most influential person. I won't call his name, but I could tell you who is. But I won't call his name. And it's okay. That doesn't intimidate me. It doesn't intimidate me. I'm just glad whoever is the most influential person it is on my side. we're in this together. So that doesn't intimidate me. But Brother Joe was that person that I knew if I got him to understand something, then he could get the people to understand something. But he also knew he couldn't do nothing without the Lord's help. We all know Brother Larry's success, and we mentioned it in preaching a couple weeks ago. We know his success as a banker. But when you talk to him about his time in Vietnam, and you talk to him about the decisions he's made that's got him where he's at, he'll tell you quickly there was someone bigger, stronger, and smarter than him looking out for him. Folks, we have to understand if God's on our side, there's nothing we can do. That was the one thing Brother Joe kept telling me. When I was wanting to go to school, but I was scared to go, "Oh, preacher, you can do it. You can do it because the Lord will help you through it." That was the thing that he kept encouraging me about over and over and over. Whatever was going on, oh, the Lord will help us through it. The Lord will help us through it. It wasn't, I'm going to do it. But you know, there were people when Brother Joe died in our church that thought we were going to fold. There were people that thought we were going to really struggle when one man died. Now get it. He was the most influential man, a wealthy man. But one man doesn't rule this church other than God. Christ is head of the church. And it may take, when some people leave, it may take 3, 4, 5 families to come in to replace their contributions, but God's got them ready to come in. It's on his timing. And so we trust the Lord, we don't trust in man. If we're trusting him, he can complete whatever task he has for us, no matter how large that task is. Now, here's the task that was in front of me. They asked me to come for a month. I was overwhelmed. I said, I need time. Let me pray about this. I'll let you know next week. I couldn't wait until 3 days later to call and tell him, I'll come, because the Lord wouldn't let me rest. He said, you can do this. So when the church called me to come full time, it was, what am I going to do after 6 months? I'll be preached everything I know in 6 months. Well, you learn more, and the Lord helps you. Now it's been 16 years, and I know there's so much I haven't covered, and if I'm here another 16 years, there'll be so much I won't cover. We trust the Lord. Whatever how big the task is, we trust the Lord. If he's called us to the task, he'll complete the task through us.
It's like that study we had back here months ago. Tell what God's got us to do. We join him in his work, and we don't have to worry about it.
That's right. Because it is his work. It's his work. So we join him.
He don't join us,
We join him. That's it. And when we join him in his work, he leads us. He becomes not the supervisor, not the foreman, but he's the owner. And because he's the owner, he sends down the orders. And we follow his orders. And if we follow his orders, everything will work out the way it's supposed to work out. If we fail to follow his orders, then we'll have to deal with the consequences of that, which means labor might get a little harder. But if we stick with it, it'll work out, but we'll cause ourselves to have to work harder than we had to. My dad told me when we were doing line work, boy, it's a lot better to work smart than it is to work hard. If you'll work smart, you won't have to work hard. You know, the children of Israel, if they had just listened, they'd have took an 11-day journey through the wilderness. Instead, they wandered around in circles for 40 years. And that first generation, that older generation that went in, did not get to see the promised land. They died in the wilderness because they failed. They failed to see. They failed to do what God would have them to do. Y'all remember the turning point in that? What caused that? Remember, 12 spies went to go see. It had been just a few days in the wilderness. 12 spies went out to see the land flowing with milk and honey, just as God had promised. And 10 of the 12 come back and said, we're like grasshoppers to them. We can't take it. When God said, I'm giving it to you. He said, I'm giving it to you. It's yours. They said, we can't take it. We can't take it. So he let them wander around and die. They didn't take it. He was going to give it to them, but they didn't want it. So be careful what we ask for. We just might get it. Last, Sanballat also ridiculed their material. Look there in verse 2. He says, will they revive the stones from the heaps of rubbish, stones that are burned? So here, the stones that they were going to use, here now he's criticizing them. They're taking the stones out of the rubble and placing them back up. In fact, many of the stones had been broken, had been cracked, had been severely burned. And when Jerusalem was attacked by the Babylonians, the city, it wasn't just torn down, but it was burned down. And when you set fire to something, it weakens it. It weakens it. So here we've got not only has Sanballat ridiculing them with these questions, but Tobiah is standing there by Sanballat's side. And Tobiah, he's an Ammonite official, and he's also a fierce opponent of Nehemiah and the Jews. So he joins in the ridicule by echoing what Sanballat's mockery of the wall, by saying, you know, even if a fox runs up there, it's going to fall down. It's not able to hold up anything. How are they going to use this wall as defense when it's going to fall down? Basically, he's saying a strong wind come, the wall's no good. It's going to fall. So now we hear all of this ridicule that's going on. How are we to respond to the ridicule? Now, Nehemiah gives us great instructions on how to respond to this ridicule. In verse 4, he says, Hear, O God, for we are despised. Turn their reproach on their heads and give them as plunder to a land of captivity. Do not cover their iniquity, and do not let their sin be blotted out from before you. For they have provoked you to anger before the builders. Here, the first thing Nehemiah does is he prayed. Nehemiah, for him, it's someone who's able to think on their feet. He was able to do that because he was prepared. Most people who are able to just wing it, they just have a gift that I don't have. But if you're prepared, you can think pretty quickly on your feet. So what does he do? The best thing there is to do is pray. Just pray. He prayed and he continued to work. We see that in verse 4 through 6. Nehemiah asked God to allow the opposition to reap what they had sowed. When Nehemiah heard about all the ridicule that the opposition was given, when he heard about the fact that the armies were being mobilized, put in place to try and intimidate them, he just immediately turned to the Lord in prayer. He didn't panic. He didn't stop. He didn't run and hide. He just turned to the Lord. He knew he couldn't do this without the Lord helping him. So he turned to his help. He shared the insults that Sanballat and Tobiah had with the Lord. He didn't sit there and grumble and complain about the insults. He didn't talk to the others about the insults. He didn't focus on those insults. He focused on the Lord. And he requested that the Lord would allow them to reap what they sow. He asked the Lord to turn their ridicule back upon their heads and let them at some point be a fugitive in a foreign land. So here Nehemiah, he requested true justice. So why would Nehemiah make what seems to be such harsh requests? Why do you think? Was it because they were picking at them? Exactly. It's as if Nehemiah didn't care what they said about him. He cared more about what they said about his God. You remember when David came up to his brothers and Goliath was on the other side of the ditch or whatever it was between them, the other side of the valley, and he's yelling out. David said, "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine? Who is this defying the armies of the living God?" It wasn't so much that the Philistine was just shouting out these words. It was that he was shouting these words toward God and God's people. Because when you shout these words out to God's people, you're shouting them out to God. Because I don't care what anybody says. Whatever you say to my child, you're saying to me. You're saying to me. If somebody's offended her, then they've offended me. Because she's mine. We're his. Man. It should be, shouldn't it? We're brothers and sisters in Christ. When someone offends one of us, we should all be bothered by that. But we should be bothered more that they're offending our God. They're offending our Father. You're talking about our Father's child. Instead of joining in with it, instead of helping them with it, we should be seeking God. Letting God, talking to Him about that. Instead of talking with one another about it in a way to where we're trying to hurt our own brother or sister. Here, he was angry because of the blasphemy against the Lord. They were provoking the Lord to anger by opposing God's work. And Nehemiah was upset by that. By opposing the Jews, they were opposing God himself. They were opposing God's work. Nehemiah didn't just pray, he continued to work. That's what's really important here. He didn't just stop and pray and say, "Oh, well, woe is me. We're going to sit here and we're going to wait for God to speak." He continued to work and trusted God would handle the rest. And he would do whatever God would lead him to do in the midst of it all. Even in the midst of the ridicule, it didn't stop the work. The work had to be done. Nehemiah didn't allow their insults to stop them. He and the people, they stopped to pray, but once their prayer was finished, they went back to work. Despite facing the constant scorn and ridicule, they continued to work diligently toward the goal. You can't work diligently toward the goal while you're griping about what took place. You've got to let that go. There's nothing you can do about it. There was nothing he could do to stop Sanballat. There's nothing he could do to stop Tobiah. He couldn't make them shut up. There was nothing he could do to stop them from saying what they were going to say. Now he had to get everybody's mind focused on the Lord and the Lord's work, and let that outside influence stay outside. And as a result, they soon completed half the wall, half to its original height. You know, too often we will give up when we are being ridiculed. We'll give up when we're being mocked and scorned. When people are coming at us, man, I ain't got to deal with that. You know, they can have it. You know, that was my MO most of my life, and they can have it. There's been one or two occasions when I was ready to say that here. They can have it. I ain't got to go through this. And the Lord showed me, oh yeah, you got to go through it. You got to go through it. Yeah. We often think that the easy thing to do is just walk away. And it is the easy thing to do. But we don't grow in walking away. We grow in learning how to just stay right there, trust the Lord, and stick it out. And love people in the midst of whatever it is they're doing to you. When the world makes fun of us or insults our testimony for Christ, many will turn away from the Lord and go back to the world. Some even will stop. Can you believe that? Some will stop even witnessing for Christ because they feel the pressure of being mocked. They feel afraid that they're just going to laugh at me. They're going to count me as no one they want to spend any time with. You know, there are people on jobs that they're afraid to witness because they don't want to seem like they don't fit in. So they won't witness they won't even let people know that there's something different about them. They just do what everybody else is doing in the workplace so they can fit in, trying to hide who they really are because of the ridicule they're trying to avoid. Man, what would it have been like if they would have only ridiculed Jesus? If they'd have done nothing but ridicule him, what sacrifice would there have been? But they did much more than that. In the midst of them illegally trying him, they ridiculed him. In the midst of them whipping him, they ridiculed him. In the midst of putting the crown on his head, in the midst of pushing him up Golgotha's hill, in the midst of nailing him to the cross, in the midst of suspending him between heaven and earth, they ridiculed him. Man, there was even one of the thieves on the cross beside him was ridiculing him. Hey, why don't you save yourself and save us? Oh, you can't. Yeah. They were ridiculing him the whole time, but they did far more than that. What if there would have been no cross? There'd have been no dusty road to Golgotha. There'd have been no crown of thorns. There'd have been no whipping post. There wouldn't have been an illegal trial. We wouldn't have access to God. But because he went through so much for us, we have access to the Almighty, the giver of life, the sustainer of life. The fear of being scorned or embarrassed causes many to keep silent about their salvation, and others are committing sin and wickedness because they've given in to the taunting of others, the pressure of others. Have you ever been in a conversation with someone in public and it begins about the Lord and your voice starts to get lower and you hope they don't talk quite as loud because of who might walk by? You ever had your window down at a fast food restaurant and you turned it down, not so you could hear the person on the speaker, but so that everybody else around you is not offended because you're playing gospel music? You know, these are things that people do and don't even think about it. I mean, they're not even conscious of the fact that they're lowering their voice, or they're not allowing God's songs to be sang, or they're in a restaurant and they want to pray in the van rather than at the table, or in their vehicle than at the table.
Basically, in the hotel, they're staying there. Every morning, we had a call, no, correctly, they want you to call. We'd pray every morning when we went down to eat. So, about the third day there, the desk, the guy working on the desk, he said, I've been working here 4 years. Somebody pray for me at the breakfast table. Y'all the first one.
Yeah. You think you might have been the first Christians to go in there, though? Chances are not. Yeah. We can't allow the fear of ridicule to shut us up. We can't allow the fear of ridicule to keep us, to stop us from doing what God would have us to do. The fear of ridicule, right now, what they're trying to do is ridicule us to see things a certain way. That's what the country's doing now. Those who don't see things a certain way, they're being ridiculed. What are we called? Racist? If we don't see things a certain way. Bigots. Uninformed. We're naive. Arrogant. Jesus is the only way to heaven? Boy, that's an arrogant statement in the minds of those who rebel against him. So your way is right. What about the Jehovah's Witness way? What about the Mormon way? What about the Jews' way? Or what about Islam's way? What makes you right? This. That's what makes us right. This. It's not arrogance, it's truth. And we can't allow what the world says or does to cause us to run and hide from the truth. We shouldn't. We shouldn't. Too often we give up instead of looking for the answer. And the answer to all that mistreatment that we may face is prayer. We trust God. We pray and trust God. Yeah. Yeah. But you know, if we'll call on the Lord, he'll strengthen us and he'll give us what we need to stand. And through prayer and perseverance, we'll be able to conquer anybody or anything that opposes us. Yeah, he definitely will give us the courage. Through prayer, we have the assurance of victory. I'm going to share this and we're going to go. We have assurance of victory in all our trials and temptations. Mark 11:24 says, therefore I say to you, whatever things you ask, when you pray, believe that you receive them and that you will have them. Deuteronomy 4:29, but from there you will seek the Lord your God, and you will find him if you seek him in all your heart, with all your heart and all your soul. Psalm 91:15, he shall call upon me, and I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will deliver and honor him. Those are promises that we have. And then we can experience victory when we remain steadfast and we persevere. In other words, we pray, we seek the Lord, but we continue to work. 1 Corinthians 15 and 58 says, therefore, my beloved, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that your labor is not in vain in the Lord. Galatians 6 and 9 says, and let us not grow weary in doing good, for in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart. Boy, there's a clause there, isn't there? We'll reap if we do not lose heart. Stay the course. Romans 8 and 37, yet in all these things we're more than conquerors through him who loved us. We can only conquer our enemies through him. We don't have the power within ourselves to do it. Satan's mightier than we are when we are alone, but we are greater than him when God's with us. Any other questions, thoughts?
They're trying to make what's wrong, right.
Yeah.
What's right, wrong. And it seems like he was winning right now, but I know that we win again.
Yeah, we've won. I mean, that's the truth. We've already won. And we're in here. We're going to have to go through this. We got to bear marks in the body just as Christ did. So we're going to have to go through these things. So while going through them, as Peter taught, we see so many similarities in this as you see in Peter's epistle. You just stay the course. Just stay the course. Continue doing what God has called you to do. So when they come against you, so what? What's the worst they can do? Take your life when they put you in the presence of God? That's the very worst that could happen, is they put you in the presence of God. So we stay the course. Yeah. So when our testimony is at stake and they want to ridicule us and we stand firm, we can smile in their face and say, you're doing nothing but blessing me. You keep ridiculing my testimony all you want. It's another stone in my crown that I get to put at the feet of the Savior. Yeah, the world doesn't win this thing. God's got it fixed. It's already fixed. It's just got to play out in his timing.